The Awakening of Joel Singer by Scott McCaffrey. Narrated by Luke Welland. Part 6. Adventures Abroad. Francesca could see the look of poorly concealed annoyance on Robert's face as he sat in his home office, still working at 10:15 p.m. Now, she said, before he could say anything. You don't regret giving me a key, do you? She stood behind him and began to rub his shoulders. I know you don't mind when I sneak into your bed wearing a teddy. Leaning down, she whispered in his ear, A teddy and nothing else? The look of annoyance began to melt from Robert's face, and Francesca could see him becoming aroused. Well, if you ever take a break, there's a new Japanese restaurant opening in Tribeca this Saturday night, and I'd like to go. It's going to be the hottest party in the city. You know me. Always about the hottest party in town, Robert replied ironically. I'll wear that little black dress you like. You do look good in it, he said, finally cracking a smile. And your little neighborhood watch group will keep us safe, won't it? The police will keep us safe. The volunteers are just there to support their efforts. I've heard that support got taken to a new level last week. How's that? I read about a thug in Brooklyn who ended up dead. They often do. But this one was killed by a man leaping from one moving car to another like he was playing hopscotch. That was never really confirmed, from what I read. It was hard to confirm since the man who shot the thug got away, and they never found a bullet in the victim's body. Francesca replied. How about that? The gangbanger got what he deserved in any case, Francesca said. It wasn't a question of that. He was on his way to kill a witness for one of his other crimes. From what you read, you mean? Where's this going? That thug from Brooklyn isn't the only one who should have the process of reaping what he's sown sped up. Your father just got out, I know. Are you going to do anything about him? I looked into your father's case. Not only was he found guilty, but the judge threw the book at him. He got the maximum sentence. No, he didn't. Not as far as I'm concerned. You know, Robert, most women in New York get plastic surgery to make themselves look younger. And then some of us get it because they got their nose broken 7 times by the man who was supposed to be protecting them. I know. And some women get called by their mothers to have lunch at the Russian tea room occasionally, while others of us get called by the bartender at Hogs and Heifers every once in a while to come get her mother, because she's stumbling drunk again at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know. And you just go get her without a word. Because you don't think the bartender would be that interested to hear that she only gets drunk every day because the moment she's sober, she starts having flashbacks about being dragged up the stairs by her hair because the pot roast was a little cold. Look, and he got 10 years? That was his maximum sentence? He's paid his price for beating the shit out of us for 20 years, but we still have to pay for not ducking? Francesca, I don't pretend that I can empathize with what you went through. But I'm very sorry it happened. I wish I could have stopped it. But the CVs, contrary to popular opinion, are not vigilantes. They don't go after criminals that have served full sentences. They focus on criminals that go after witnesses because that is the most efficient way to help the police stop crime. That's bullshit. That's their focus because that's the way your wife was killed. Hey, don't you talk about my wife. Neither of them spoke for a tense minute. I'm sorry, I got carried away. You're right, justice was served. Anything else would just be revenge. And it would be illegal. Of course. Look, I'll keep an eye on him. If the thought of missing an appointment with his parole officer so much as crosses his mind, I'll have his ass back in jail the next day. Okay, thanks. You don't have to thank me. I'm glad to do it. There was a pause. So, what kind of chair is this you're sitting in? Francesca asked. The CEO of NoTech can't afford a chair with armrests? Dr. Harrington smirked. It makes it easier to type, he said. That's not the only thing it makes easier, Francesca replied as she lifted up her dress. There was nothing underneath tonight, either. It was just a regular cruise ship. It had left Puget Sound off Seattle 8 days earlier. The Carnival logos had been painted over with black paint. One helicopter was docked on either end of the ship. Joel found himself on a vessel with 1,000 of the most powerful beings on the face of the earth. heading for a possible showdown with, arguably, the world's most hostile government and its fourth largest military. He would not have appeared anxious to an outsider, but Joel wasn't sure if that was because he had learned to hide his fears well or because he had no one to express them to. The CVs, for their part, looked relaxed but vigilant. About half were on duty at any given time while the other half slept or took advantage of the amenities on the ship. In no way did they act robotic or brainwashed. Nor, however, did they act like typical 20-somethings on a cruise ship with an open bar. Many of the off-duty initiates did gather at the ship's bars, but they talked and laughed quietly. There were some discreet couples on the boat, but no uncouth public displays of affection, although Joel's heightened senses inevitably revealed a good number were sexually active. Some of the initiates had invited Joel to join them for meals or drinks, but he had always declined. They gave no outward sign that they saw him as a threat or an oddity, but Joel could sense a rise in their norepinephrine and adrenaline levels when they saw him. He did not lack for something to do. Dr. Harrington had set up a lab in the ship's arcade, aligned to his office, and had included some cancerous rats in the lab for Joel to work on. He had specifically requested that Joel work on treating some of the rats via direct signaling from his body, instead of with the new cancer drug, Penivate. The CEO had also asked that Joel try to transmit the cure from a distance versus just from the placing of hands. Joel wasn't sure why Dr. Harrington had made these requests, but he attempted them anyway. They had managed to leave port and travel through international waters for 8 days without hindrance. When they were about 100 miles off the coast of North Korea, however, Joel heard a call come in from a U.S. Navy frigate to the captain's cabin as Joel stood about halfway down the ship. "This is Captain Hernandez of the USS Truman. You are entering unauthorized waters. Please identify yourself. Over." "You are not authorized to have that information. Over." A familiar voice responded. It was Greg's. "Excuse me," the naval officer replied. "You are not authorized to know any details of this ship or our mission. Over." The USS Truman's admiral now came on the line. "Listen, cowboy, I don't know what the hell kind of fucking patchwork contraption you're sailing there, or what the fuck you're doing 5,000 miles away from where you should be serving Long Island iced teas. But if you think you're getting any closer to that midget madman so there's any chance I have to risk one hair on a sailor's head rescuing your dumbasses, you're nuts. Please check with Washington, Admiral. I'm very busy. Over." "Hold on, Joker," the Truman's commanding officer replied. 2 minutes later, the Admiral came back on the line. "You may proceed. Please use caution. Over." "Always, Admiral. Over." About an hour later, Joel heard a call over the loudspeaker. "Joel Singer, please report to the captain's deck." The sound of it startled him, as he had been fixated on his assigned project, one on which he had finally had a breakthrough. He had managed to transmit his cancer cure out of his fingers and through the air, sending the same signal through electromagnetic waves that the drug transmitted chemically. It felt different from any transformation he had previously performed. In the past, all he would have to do was supplement his passing knowledge of an organism with some research before his body would bring forth the desired signal. Now, he had been trying to carry through changes that not only had never been initiated by him, they had never occurred in natural history. Finally, he was able to prod some of the nerve endings in his fingers to bundle and extend until they were flush with the skin covering his digits. A steady combination of research, meditation, and patience finally brought about the desired results, as a complex transmission leapt from his fingers. The hard-won success had brought a sense of euphoria, cut short by the blaring of the loudspeaker. Nevertheless, Joel walked outside to the promenade and reached the cramped captain's deck a minute later. Greg turned in his chair as Joel entered. 2 more CVs stood behind him. He saw the startled look on the CVs' faces. He followed their stares down to his right hand, which he now saw had taken the form of a sea urchin, sharp spikes ready to strike. He breathed deep, calming himself, and returned the hand to normal. Greg noted Joel's reaction to seeing him. "Wasn't it worth it?" he said, referring to their battle at the library. Joel said nothing but nodded slightly. "I'm looking forward to working with you. We have a critically important mission." "What's next?" "Good, right to the point. You really are one of us." The main group of CVs will work on delivering food and supplies to the areas that will be facing starvation because of the explosion at the reactor. They will set up a corridor so that refugees can travel to camps that we will set up and guard. That is all. There will be no interfacing with the North Korean government and certainly no attacking it. Still, this is unprecedented, this kind of interference. Actually, it's not. We're continuing a proud history of interfering to help alleviate humanitarian crises. Back in 1847, when the Irish were starving because the potatoes were diseased and the British had largely taken the other crops, America allowed volunteers to take 2 Navy ships, the Jamestown and the Macedonian, filled with food to travel to Ireland ships that defied the indifference of the British. A total of 114 humanitarian ships traveled from America to Ireland that year. I don't think the British had torpedoes back then. We've planned for that. Let's just focus on our side mission. Our side mission? Yes, you and me. We're going to the less accessible parts of North Korea, where we need to help. I thought it was all pretty inaccessible. We'll be going to the part where the people have been directly affected by the radiation and are at high risk for cancer. It will be especially well guarded. You have managed to transmit your healing signal through the air. Yes, it took some time at first. Good. We don't anticipate being allowed to hand out pills. How are we going to get there? Joel asked. Greg motioned behind him, out the window on the deck where one of the helicopters sat. We're taking one helicopter into an area surrounded by thousands of heavily armed troops? Joel asked. Worse, actually. That area will also be radioactive. But how? It's all been planned. Who's leading the rest of the CVs? Just then, Kim came in. Greg motioned toward her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm afraid I have to focus on the North Korean Welcoming Committee. They didn't disappoint. 5 minutes later, an angry voice came over the line, screaming in Korean. An Asian initiate stood at the ready. He translated. This is General Tseng. You are in North Korean waters. You may not proceed farther. They're going to blow us out of the water, Joel said. That's not what they're going to do. Greg replied calmly, then spoke to the translator. General Tseng, this is the SS Notek. We are here on a humanitarian mission to distribute food and medicine. Our CEO, Dr. Robert Harrington, would like to convene a dialogue with the dear leader on how this can be a diplomatic boon for him. SS Notek, prepare to be boarded, came the translation back. That's what they're going to do, Greg now said. This is a ship full of food and other valuable supplies, never mind our money and personal possessions, and their radar has already detected that we don't have any mounted guns. 1,000 CVs should be able to handle any boarding party, is that what you're thinking? Sure, we could capture them, but eventually they'd cut their losses and sink us. What are we going to do then? In response, Greg said over the loudspeaker, Gold Team, go! Joel's eyes caught the movement of a dozen lifeboats dropping into the water simultaneously, with 6 initiates on each. They headed toward the shore using their outboard motors. Joel turned toward the front and changed his eyes to those of a peregrine falcon, allowing him to see 8 times farther than a normal person. He saw a dozen ships heading their way, 2 battleships, 4 destroyers, and 6 PT boats, an armada versus 12 lifeboats. Now, the North Korean ships were in plain view for a normal person, and the lifeboats were within 100 yards of the fleet. What Joel saw next happened too fast for the North Koreans to process, never mind respond to. The initiates in the lifeboats raised what looked like flare guns, then fired golf ball-sized pellets. At least a dozen evenly spaced pellets hit and stuck to each ship, including 1 or more on each of the boat's cannons. In a blink, the spheres liquefied, expanded, and converged on each other, covering the ships completely. The outer shells of the vessels, even the battleships, dissolved in an instant, leaving the men on deck hanging in midair before falling into the now visible innards of their ships. Water gushed through the exposed framework of the ships into the cabins, gun batteries, and cafeterias. The acrid smell of shorted-out electronics filled the air like a hairdryer left on high for too long. The men in the ship scrambled futilely from the water. Look familiar, Joel. Joel stared in disbelief. That's my drug, he said. I mean, you made that from my drug, Dissolva. Notek's drug, Joel. You know the company that pays for your reform center, the one that manufactures and sells your drug? Besides, I think you can tell we had to make some adjustments for this application. But, Gold Team, commence Phase 2, Greg interrupted. The initiates on the dozen boats immediately dove into the water in unison, allowing the vessels to continue on to the ships they had just doomed. Blue Team, you're on! 30 more lifeboats plunged into the water. They picked up the Koreans struggling in the water even as they passed the initiates swimming back. The initiates practically glided through the water. So smooth and effortless were their strokes as they swam back to the ship. A couple of minutes later, the Gold Team had arrived and climbed up their waiting ropes as quickly as a normal person would slide down. Are we ready to head to shore? Joel asked. Not just yet, Greg replied. 5 seconds later, Joel picked up the sound of rockets being fired. They came into his view moments later, 8 of them traveling at supersonic speed. One was coming right at their cabin. Joel increased his density, got ready to cover all the CVs he could, and braced for impact. There was none. The missiles met the same fate as the ships. Joel could now see the group of CVs lowering their weapons. Nice shooting, Joel said to Greg, although one missile the initiates missed on the first volley came within 20 yards of the ship, shattering the windows of the captain's deck with a shockwave before dissolving. As you can see, we planned for this contingency, Greg said. It seems like if they fire enough missiles, they could sink us, Joel replied. Unlikely. It may be the world's 4th largest military, but they don't want to waste missiles. Are we hoping they don't want to waste bullets once we reach the shore? Joel asked. Maybe they won't. Our folks will be wearing bulletproof vests and helmets. Besides, the helicopter will be a bigger target. Francesca found Demetrius in the no-tech security office, looking at a computer printout. Hello, Demetrius, she said. Ms. Johansson, he replied. Are you keeping us safe? From everything but lawsuits, he replied. Maybe there is a place for me here then. How can I help you, Ms. Johansson? Maybe we can help each other, she said, clasping his arm. For the first time in her life, a man didn't get excited at such a gesture from her. If you have a security concern, it's my job to take care of it. No reciprocation will be necessary. All right. Actually, I do have a security concern. There's a predator out there, and I'm sure he'll strike again. He's going to strike this building, Miss Johansson. Now, Demetrius, we both know you've expanded your protection beyond this building, and thank God for it. Who is it you're concerned about? My father. Your father? Have you talked to Dr. Harrington about this? Yes. He doesn't see a way to put him back in jail, and he doesn't want him harmed. Francesca went on to explain what her father had done to her family. I'll keep an eye on him, Demetrius said in response. Robert has already promised me that. Can't you act prophylactically? Dr. Harrington said he wasn't to be harmed. Don't harm him. Just put the fear of God into him, like only you can. There was silence for a minute. We'll see. The North Koreans had lost enough already. They gave only token resistance as the CVs came to shore, just enough to learn that their strange enemies' weapons dissolved tanks and guns as well. The army pulled back to find the force was true to its word, and they made no move to attack the retreating North Koreans. Kim watched the backtracking regiment. They finally cleared out, leaving behind a much more terrible sight. The devastation was breathtaking. The harvest season had just begun, but that had not stopped theft on an unspeakable scale. The small silos scattered across the grassy plains had their doors thrown open, in some cases torn off in the soldiers' haste. Kim saw muddy tire tracks leading up to and tearing into the barren fields. Broken carts, wheels snapped off from far too great a burden were at the end of many of the tracks. The villagers had been put to work, helping the army steal their food. The field's devastation was a terrible sight, but did not assault the senses the way the village itself did. Children wailed, their ribs protruding against their skin. Kim's enhanced sense of smell revealed the mold on bread the lucky few were eating around. No special sense was needed to make one gag as the pungent stacks of garbage competed with human filth to overpower any newcomer. Those with the strength to walk swarmed Kim and the 20 other CVs who first entered the village of about 1,000. They poured out of their thatched roof huts and jury-rigged shanties, some holding their babies in front of them. Others had flies on their faces they no longer had the strength to flick away. It would have been frightening if Kim hadn't had the strength to keep dozens of strong adults at bay, never mind these gaunt husks of humanity. The 20 or so villagers surrounding Kim lost all interest in her when they saw the first pickup truck come over the hill, its bed piled high with burlap sacks. The hope of what might be in those sacks made the villagers leave Kim faster than a live grenade in her hand would have. All except for one boy of 10 or so, who threw his arms around her with ecstatic gratitude. The young man in the truck bed was getting many such embraces, as were the other CVs involved in the operation. A fleeting pang of pity filled Kim's heart for those who would never be able to right such wrongs as they did. 6 hours later, as dusk approached, their team had already established secure corridors in the Delaware-sized affected area that led from the devastated villages, with the main site at the shore supplying a handful of satellite camps. The food, largely high-calorie nutrition bars designed for famine relief, was supplemented by clean water, basic clothing, and chemical neutralizers for the waste. Kim knew Demetrius would be pleased at how well the mission was going. She pressed her ear to contact him on the secure line. But he wasn't available. Francesca's dad was off to a bad start. He hadn't done anything criminal again yet, but he had begun his parole by going straight back to his old haunts, the ones filled with the bad influences on which he had blamed his incarceration. Henry's bad judgment had made him easy to track down, however. The only hard part was killing the 9 hours Demetrius had to wait for him to come out of the dive bar he was in. Demetrius would have felt too conspicuous at this bar, and there was only so much time one could spend at check-cashing joints and pawn shops. Demetrius caught up with Henry as he was passing by a weed-strewn, vacant lot. "Henry Jacobson." "Who wants to know?" came the response as Henry turned around. Demetrius found himself facing a tall man of about 55, gray-haired and lightly wrinkled, but with still straight and broad shoulders. Demetrius picked him up with his right pinky finger. He placed his digit under the felon's chin, digging into the soft skin beneath his lower jaw. Demetrius gazed up at the man at the end of his extended arm with a look of disdain. Francesca's father stared back with a look of pure agony and terror. "Maybe now you're starting to get an idea of what it's like when someone bigger and stronger takes advantage of your weakness, makes you feel helpless. It fills you with such rage, doesn't it? All the more so because you know your rage is impotent." The only response was a gurgled yell. "Of course, I can't really show you what it was like for your victims, since I am not just using you as a scapegoat for my own miserable failures. And you're not being attacked by the very man who was supposed to be your protector." "Arg!" Henry cried in a muffled tone, blood now dripping down Demetrius's pinky. Demetrius carried Francesca's father into the adjacent alley, with a dumpster at the far end. "Now, I'm going to be keeping an eye on you, Henry. If you so much as lift a hand to strike anyone, you're not going to be putting it back down for a long time. Do you know why? Because it's going to be in a cast, in traction, along with the rest of your body. Do you understand?" "Arg! Good. Now you aren't going to hurt anyone else ever again, are you, Henry?" Another stifled cry. "I want you to nod, Henry." After a moment, the convict performed the agonizing motion, impaling his lower jaw further. Demetrius's digit poked almost entirely through the soft flesh. "Good." Demetrius turned to his right and saw that the dumpster had one of its doors left open. "Well, what do you know? You're just out of jail, and I've already found a home that fits you perfectly." Demetrius flung Henry over 20 feet into the dumpster. The convict landed flat on his back on the upraised metal roof with a loud bang, then slid headfirst down into the wet, stinking filth that half filled the dumpster. The muscle-bound thug who had attacked him turned and left the alley. Henry struggled to his feet and poked his head out, his hair covered in something wet, sticky and smelling heavily of spoiled cod. He felt blood flowing down his chin in a steady stream. He opened his eyes to see a dark figure in front of him. It looked beautiful and welcoming through his blurry eyes. His vision finally cleared and he saw his daughter, Francesca, in front of him, 10 years older but unmistakable. "Francesca," he mumbled, "you must have come to find me and saw what happened. Listen,
There's no time to talk now, but I'm not the man that I was. You'll see. But I'm bleeding pretty badly here. I need to get to the hospital.
You'll be at the hospital soon, Dad. Demetrius called for an ambulance.
Demetrius? You mean that guy that attacked me? You know his name? Why would he call for an ambulance?
He wanted to scare you, Dad, not kill you.
Could have fooled me.
Where did he hurt you? You're bleeding badly.
Right here, under my chin. He poked his finger all the way through, I think.
He lifted his chin to show the gaping wound there. My God, open your mouth, let me see.
How bad is it?
His finger didn't penetrate the roof of your mouth, thank God. That could have been fatal, Francesca said. A second later, the silencer round went up into his skull. Henry slumped over, a stunned look on his dead face, revealing a 2-foot square splatter of blood and fragments of skull on the brick wall behind him. Then I wouldn't have gotten to kill you myself, she said. She slipped the gun back into her purse and walked carefully out of the alley. She walked stone-faced all the way back to her apartment, and then sobbed for 10 hours straight. Greg and Joel had made it out of the coastal area unscathed, Greg having piloted the helicopter with great skill. Joel noticed a few of the North Koreans pointing their guns and even one tank turret up at them, but the initiates coming off the ship nabbed them all with their unique weapons. They were a half-hour from the coast and about an hour from the area affected by the explosion at the reactor. They enjoyed the quiet before the storm. So you all grew up in a camp together? Joel asked Greg.
Yes.
Who taught you all those skills you have?
We had teachers come in, but they usually only stayed for 1-year rotations. Then we also had specialists who came in for a week at a time or so to teach us specialized skills, like martial arts, shooting skills, things like that.
Just for a week or so?
We were designed to absorb lessons very quickly. I believe Dr. Harrington mentioned that to you.
That's right, but didn't they notice how unusual you were?
Not the specialists. There were a very limited number of activities that would have revealed any sort of superhuman abilities. We got shooting and archery lessons, for example, and while the instructors were impressed, they had been told that we were gifted athletes.
Just gifted, not genetically engineered super kids?
Joel, Greg replied, some things are so unbelievable you can't accept them, even when the evidence is right before your eyes.
And that's what Dr. Harrington banked on?
No, Dr. Harrington never banked on anything. When it came to the regular long-term instructors, Dr. Harrington believed in hiring locally.
Now wait, isn't this camp located in the middle of northeastern Alaska? About 200 miles north of Fairbanks?
Yes.
No one lives locally there. There are no roads and no towns for hundreds of miles.
The first part of what you said is accurate, but not the second.
Joel sat puzzled for a moment. Then it hit him. The natives. The Native Americans, he said.
Greg nodded. The Inuits, yes.
But you must have needed hundreds of them, and most of the bush villages have less than 50 people.
We needed 100 or so at one time, no more.
Only one teacher per 50 students?
Yes, again, we learned easily, even with high teacher-to-student ratios, he said with a smile. They were just there to facilitate a step-by-step program that had been laid out for them very specifically by Dr. Harrington.
And who better to keep word from getting back to civilization and not ask questions? Joel surmised.
Greg nodded. But you're right, the closest villages didn't have enough candidates. They did sometimes have to be flown in from Kotzebu, an Inuit village of over 3,000 from the other side of the state.
How big a compound were you hiding?
25 square miles, over 15,000 acres.
That must have been quite a sight.
Actually, it wasn't, but then that was the whole point. We grew trees around the complex as thickly as we could, then painted more on the roofs of the buildings.
How big are the buildings?
The biggest one is larger than the Superdome in terms of the land coverage, but it just looks like a big camouflaged warehouse from the outside.
How did you build such a structure? I thought you didn't have any roads.
We didn't have any roads within 50 miles, but that was closer than a lot of other places in Alaska. 50 miles west, there was the Dalton Highway, a mainly dirt and gravel road that traverses the 400 miles from Fairbanks to the Arctic Ocean. When the ground was frozen, which was most of the year, trucks could make it through the boreal forest.
What about other resources like food, water, and oil?
Well, with oil, that's the other reason we stuck somewhat close to the Dalton Highway.
Why's that?
Because there's a massive 4-foot wide oil pipeline that runs from the coast of the Arctic Ocean hundreds of miles south alongside the Dalton Highway. An astute observer might have noticed that one of the supports running underneath the pipeline was a little thicker than it should have been.
Because it wasn't a support. It was an adjunct pipeline going underground to your camp, siphoning off some of the oil.
Greg nodded. A discreet deal Dr. Harrington made with the oil company executives. As far as food and water went, they came from the same source. The Yukon River runs about 40 miles to the south. There we got water and food, mainly salmon. Lots of salmon. We had smoked salmon, grilled salmon, filleted salmon, salmon burgers, and salmon shish kebabs.
You couldn't have lived on just salmon, though.
You're right, and that did put us in a tough situation. We were far from where we could get food. We couldn't grow enough, and we didn't want to reveal our location. It was a tough situation, but hardly a unique one.
Joel thought for a moment. Any soldier on a covert mission would be in that same situation, he replied.
Greg nodded again, and a solution had already been invented. MREs, meals ready to eat. They were originally designed for the military, prepackaged, complete meals with a heating element inside that lights when the package is exposed to air. Dr. Harrington got us the original versions with a lot of calories, 5,000 or more in some cases. There were over a dozen varieties, although the chicken teriyaki was my favorite.
Joel had read an article about these meals once, but it wasn't as positive as Greg. It had mentioned how the troops said that MRE stood for Meals Rejected by Everyone. How did you get them there?
A truck met the supplier outside a warehouse near Fairbanks.
They never suspected anything?
They were used to dealing with folks who didn't want a lot of questions. This was rural Alaska, after all. There was this one driver who said, "Man, you're taking a lot of stuff. Is there a whole city stuff with survivalists up there?" He never delivered for us again.
Weren't you bored at all out there in the middle of the wilderness?
Not at all. That big building I mentioned before had facilities for football, basketball, tennis, you name it. It also had a huge game room with pool tables and batting cages. We had a restaurant that we could go to once a week. We had satellite TV, a movie theater.
Did the movie theater get first-run movies?
I don't know. They were always first-run movies to us.
But didn't the satellite TV make you miss the outside world?
No, but it gave us a few laughs. We used to watch your sports. How about that guy, Michael Jordan? He was considered the best basketball player ever.
Did you know that he could only jump about 4 feet in the air and he missed almost half of his shots?
Did you know that Olympic sprinters needed almost 10 seconds to run 100 yards? And the top weightlifters could only bench press 700 pounds? And how about the rest of outside society? More than half of the adults in the U.S. were overweight. The streets were ridden with crime. And some kids had to do hours of homework a day to remember their lessons. No, we were happy to make do with no crime, no homework, and the best sports in the world.
So it was enjoyable to be superior? Joel said, probing a little bit.
Well, now just because we're stronger and learn things faster, that doesn't make us fundamentally superior. All people are equal, and we must never think our abilities give us greater rights than other people. Dr. Harrington never let us forget that.
Okay, but didn't anyone ever want to make a beer run?
Joel said with a smile. We were all under 21, Joel. That would have been illegal. Joel chuckled. Did I say something funny?
Greg responded, his face not showing even a hint of irony. Joel realized now that neither Greg nor the other initiates were brainwashed. Brainwashing was something you had to do when you needed to convert someone, a way of breaking down a personality quickly and replacing it with unquestioning obedience. Dr. Harrington had 20 years to build the personalities of the initiates, and 9 months before that to predispose them to adapt to his way of thinking. They weren't brainwashed, just extremely loyal. Then his pondering was interrupted by the most horrible sight he had ever seen. First, they saw the reactor enveloped by a huge lead dome. The North Koreans had obviously had it ready, which is why the radiation had not spread as far during this incident as it had at Chernobyl. About 200 mainly bamboo huts dotted the village along with a couple of small stores that were now vacant. They could see some villagers milling about.
The accident happened a month ago, Greg said to Joel. The long-term effects won't be seen for months, if not years. The next generation will get the worst of it.
They could both see radiation burns on a few and spotted others coughing up blood.
Those are some of the acute effects, Greg commented. God, their immune systems are nil right now. The radiation wiped out their white blood cells.
They could both see the fields that had been burnt to the ground. A lot of them look like they're starving already, Joel said, referring to those in the village whose ribs were clearly visible as they moved lethargically, if at all.
They were plenty hungry before the accident, Greg replied. This was just the icing on the cake. Many had starved to death already. Some of the children died after eating the cheap substitute food the government supplies to these people, like ersatz rice cakes, the terrible paste made from the inner bark of pine trees that can block up their digestive systems. And that's not all.
Joel didn't hear what Greg said next. His vision blurred for a moment, and then he saw the entombed reactor start to flicker. Suddenly, the naked reactor came into view. A massive explosion threw the 50-foot wide, 2-million-pound steel and concrete ceiling cap clear off its moorings and into the air. It ripped through the thick corrugated steel of the lower, broader section of the reactor like it was made of paper. Joel could smell burning, melting graphite as the temperature in the reactor soared above 2,000 degrees.
This explosion would have released 200 times the radiation at Hiroshima if they hadn't had that cap ready, but it's still more concentrated here, Greg said. Joel, come on, we're approaching the village. Look out for troops.
Joel shook himself out of his stupor. Did you see that? He said to Greg. Did you see that massive explosion?
What are you talking about? Greg replied. The explosion happened a month ago. Come on, Joel, the village.
Joel focused on the village, now surrounded by a barbed wire fence. He found himself having another vision, but this time he was aware of it, like a lucid dreamer. And this time it was of the future. He saw an emaciated boy crawling out of his hut, his thin and withered legs stuck in a cross position as they dragged behind him. Then a girl of about 12 with a tumor coming out of her lower back that was larger than her head, so large it poked out from under her shirt as it sagged like a balloon filled with wet sand. A 15-year-old boy sat in a chair being spoon-fed moldy rice. His teeth were too large for his mouth and splayed out at a disturbing 45-degree angle. All were, of course, victims of radiation poisoning. Joel snapped back to the present view of the village.
Look out for soldiers, Greg said. We're getting in range.
No sooner had Greg said this than the helicopter veered to miss the first rounds that were being fired. He now saw at least 100 North Korean soldiers in protective suits pulling up in jeeps, scrambling out to join the 20 or so that were already stationed there.
Lean back,
he said to Joel just as Greg fired his special disintegration gun through the open side door, the rounds going off with blazing speed as Greg's arm cut a wide, loopy swath through the air. Joel saw a moment later that 10 of the soldiers' guns had disintegrated. Even more amazingly, Greg had hit 10 soldiers who were interspersed with their comrades, not 10 who were next to each other. You detected which soldiers' bullets were actually going to hit the helicopter, Joel said. You must have obliterated 10 of their guns in a second.
Greg nodded. Our weapons are designed to utilize our physical skills instead of rendering them largely irrelevant like most modern weapons. Now come on, do your thing.
Okay, Joel replied. He stretched out his morphing hand, sending out the waves that would signal the same anti-mutation effect as Penivate. It worked, not visibly in all the villagers, since some did not even have rudimentary cancer yet. In others, however, the characteristic initial exacerbation of tumors occurred, sometimes to the point where the bulbous malignancies could be seen pressing against the skin, only to shrink out of existence seconds later. The people looked more baffled than grateful. Greg flipped a switch, and a message played in Korean that explained what was happening and urged the other villagers to come out of their huts. After a short delay, the bewilderment of the villagers' faces turned to elation. Those that could manage walked out. Others had their bony frames carried out by peasants who looked only slightly healthier.
We've got to get a little closer now, Greg said.
He turned the helicopter in a wide arc, taking a path over the closer of the 2 rows of huts, less than 100 feet up. Greg pulled the lever and hundreds of MREs and meal bars poured out of the helicopter at a controlled rate. A dozen or so bold soldiers stepped forward to confiscate the food, but Greg took out their weapons with his own as they continued down the lines of huts with their delivery. Greg pulled the helicopter hard right into a 90-degree turn. He angled the helicopter to release the food properly, even as they headed to the next small village. They flew right into a trap. Over 20 troops sprung out from in between each of the 50 huts. Trying to pick off individual soldiers again was useless, because they were simply shooting their machine guns in the general direction of the helicopter, swinging their weapons to and fro in a purposely erratic manner. The 1,000 soldiers' guns ensured blanket coverage. Greg dodged the chaotic hail of bullets as best he could. He took the helicopter higher, trying to go straight up and out of range of the gunman as a bullet ripped through the helicopter's tail. Joel cringed as another round buzzed past his right ear. "Hurry, get over them!" Joel yelled. "I'm trying," Greg yelled back. But the onslaught forced him to climb in a stutter-step fashion, sometimes throwing the chopper into jarring swerves to avoid more gunfire. Joel looked down to see the soldiers maneuvering to get a better shot, emboldened by Greg's inability to fire back. Joel jerked his head up, having seen something move behind the huts. To his horror, he spotted soldiers rushing to remove shrubs and foliage from camouflaged tanks. There were at least 20. Half of one of their rotors was blown off by a tank shell with a resounding boom. The chopper nosedived right into a thicket of piercing, high-caliber rounds the tanks fired from mounted guns. Neither the chopper nor its occupants could avoid. Joel's senses didn't fail him, they were overwhelmed. He felt searing pain as bullets riddled his right arm, stomach, and left shoulder. He managed to clear his head, enough to change his epidermis to bulletproof rhino skin, but not before a bullet tore through his right cheek and went out through his left, taking shards of 2 teeth with it. He saw another round take out the bridge of Greg's nose in an eruption of blood. The CV roared in agony, but still managed to right the helicopter. "We gotta pull out!" Greg shouted. He somehow managed to get the chopper out of the village and swung around the 1,000-foot mountain that framed it on one side as smoke poured from the engine. The visions of the horribly deformed children appeared before Joel's eyes again. "We have to go back," he shouted. "No way, not now. We'll circle back later if we can." Joel's heart sank as he lost his line of sight to the peasants and realized the mountain would block the signal of any waves he might try to send. Joel relaxed his mind and meditated, trying to expand his sense of intuition as only he could. A wordless insight came to him. He sent the signals to the space right in front of him through the thinnest section he could find, but not before, with the transmission from his other hand, he had turned the 400-square-foot section from granite to pure, translucent, conductive quartz. He didn't know exactly how, but he felt sure that the signals were being received in the bodies of the villagers he was trying to treat. "Okay," Greg said. "We're coming to the end of this mountain. Let's double back if we can so we can drop off some more food, and you can send your signal. We'll fly higher and directly above." "Greg, I think I already—" They flew into an ambush at point-blank range. Over 100 troops stood at the top corner of the ridge with AK-47s firing armor-piercing rounds from under 50 feet away. Bullets saturated every direction they could move as they zipped through the cabin at various angles. Joel had managed to increase the thickness of his rhino skin to 2 times normal, and was protected from the rounds. He glanced over to see Greg grimacing. The bullets were bouncing off his skin, but Joel could hear his blood vessels breaking. He knew the internal bleeding could kill his partner if he took many more hits. "Take us closer to the ridge, Greg." "No! Trust me, fly us right over them." Greg complied. Joel's left arm became the tail of a giant squid as he moved toward the open door. He fired a strong stream of black ink at the soldiers before they reached their apex. It became a huge dark wave of liquid as it engulfed the men, knocking the head covers off the flimsy protective suits of those who hadn't been left without them. Joel had mixed the ink with skunk spray, for good measure, further impairing the soldiers. Distracted, blinded, and panicked, they were poorly prepared for the next phase of Joel's attack. To Greg's visible amazement, Joel now turned his right arm into a stream of box jellyfish that dropped down onto the soldiers. They were shaped like a bell at the top, opaque at the top of the bell, nearly transparent at the bottom, as were the tentacles, which brought the creatures to a length of about 2 feet each. At least 100 of the otherworldly creatures dropped down from Joel's extremities onto the men. The soldiers kicked and flailed at the creatures, but within seconds, their movements became slow and sporadic from the stings. "Thanks, Joel. I think you just saved my life." No sooner had Greg said this than the helicopter sputtered and lurched backward and down. "Well, for a couple of minutes anyhow," he said. "I think I can at least get us to crash onto the forest over there instead of the rocky ground." Joel looked over to see a 4-square-mile expanse of large trees with light green leaves. "I don't think we're going to get to that last village." Greg said as dejectedly as an initiate ever would. Joel understood, but concentrated as best he could as he faced a broad expanse of mountain that provided no quarter of a thin edge. He distinctively focused on some aspect of the village he could feel within him, communicating a healing signal as best he could, one that need not travel through the mountain directly. It was working. Joel's elation at his success was quickly interrupted when his neck snapped back as they hit the top of a large tree. They were going down. The best Greg could do was to get the helicopter to crash at a 45-degree angle into the forest. The chopper hit the next tree at over 50 miles per hour with a loud crack as Joel and Greg were thrown forward violently against their seatbelts. The third tree caused visible cracks while the helicopter hit the next, nose first, splitting the chopper apart entirely. The seats of both men were torn off their moorings. Greg went through the front window. Joel dropped through a gaping hole in the undercarriage. Both men still buckled in. They fell 60 feet to the forest floor with an impact that would have killed ordinary men. Greg pulled Joel away just in time for the remains of the 4-ton helicopter to miss his head. Joel's left leg, however, was painfully crushed with a resounding crunch as the massive, twisted husk of metal pinned him down. Greg rolled the remains of the helicopter off his partner as Joel swung his flattened femur to safety. Joel felt his leg regenerate within seconds.
"I'll never get used to that,"
Greg said, shaking his head. He was starting to heal himself, but not nearly as fast.
"So why did you yell in pain? Can't you just turn off your pain receptors whenever you want?"
"Sure, as long as I'm willing to give up knowing if I've been hurt and how badly."
"I suppose pain can be useful, especially when you're the one dishing it out like you did with those jellyfish. That's not something you could do when we faced each other."
"Yeah."
"How did you manage that? How did you drop 100 separate animals from your arms?"
"I wasn't sure I could. But jellyfish have no brains, hearts, eyes, or ears. They aren't much more complicated than the millions of white blood cells within everyone's body that act a lot like independent organisms."
"How did you keep them alive to sting those soldiers once they left your body?"
"I didn't. Jellyfish can continue to sting after they die. Even individual tentacles that have been cut off can still sting."
"Are those men gonna make it?"
"They'll make it. Those were just baby box jellyfish. The adult ones can be 9 feet long, and they can kill a man in as little as 3 minutes.
"How about that?" Greg replied. "But why bother changing into real animals at all? Why not just come up with your own animals?"
"I can do that to some extent. But it's always easier to change into an animal that exists or used to exist. It's always easier to go back down a lit, existing genetic pathway."
"So by researching animals, you get the blueprint you need?"
"Yes, but besides, sometimes tweaking an animal ostensibly to improve it does more harm than good. For example, if I turned into a giant ant, I'd suffocate. Since insects absorb oxygen through their body, only small animals get enough that way. Plus, suddenly Joel saw a flash of light, heard a deafening roar, and everything went black. "Ron," Carol said as she entered his office, "the first 2 candidates for the senior R&D position are here."
Oh, Ron responded distractedly as he looked up. "Send them in."
"You're going to see them one at a time. Do you know which one you want to interview first?"
"Why am I interviewing them? Don't you think Dr. Harrington will basically take Steve's recommendation?"
Ron said, referring to the vice president of R&D. "I suppose, but both candidates are political dissidents claiming asylum. The legal department has to investigate the legitimacy of their claims."
"Where are they from?"
"One is from China, Sheng Peng. He is the one Steve is recommending. The other one is from Bolivia, Hector Pellegrande. Steve's notes say that both are brilliant scientists with groundbreaking research published in top journals. He's giving his recommendation to Mr. Peng, however. He's been the lead author on more articles, and he's already patented 2 potentially groundbreaking compounds."
"You said that Hector is from Bolivia?"
"Yes, that's right."
"Interesting. Isn't there more of a risk that Deng could go back to China and take our intellectual property with him?"
"I don't think so, sir. He was jailed there for 2 years for staging political protests. I doubt he'd go back."
"Yeah, but you never know. No-tech secrets could buy a lot of indulgences, make the government there very forgetful about those protests.
But
let's have Hector come in first."
Gary had been warned about Mrs. Thomas. The feisty old lady had seen one of the suede bullets take down a rival. She was one of the few old-timers in the Queens neighborhood who had refused to leave and would have reported any crime she saw before the super vigilantes had come along. "Go down there and you're going to end up in the same cell as Jake," he'd been warned, and Gary decided to take his chances. Revenue was down about 20% from the past year, and there couldn't have been more suede bullets going upstate unless they all drove themselves to Sing Sing and started banging on the bars to get in. He had heard the Knights were getting it even worse. Gary found her bony ass sitting on the porch at the first level of the rundown triplex. She wasn't exactly happy to see him. Neither were the two CVs he could see standing across the street, watching him like hawks. Gary gave them a friendly wave. It was not returned. "Don't come one step closer," she screeched as she sat on a plastic chair. "Don't think you're not being watched right now, and don't think you're going to scare me. I don't care who you are, and I don't care who you know. I'm not keeping my mouth shut. I'm a broken-down old lady, and I'm on my way out. But I still got a good pair of eyes, a good pair of ears, and a mouth to tell the police what you gangster drug-dealing scum are doing out here. Your guy picked the wrong lady to shoot someone in front of." She had him there. Gary had warned his posse not to so much as jaywalk in front of this house, but the Knights hadn't given Jake much choice, as was their usual modus operandi. The Knights had been whack enough to start shooting his homeboy at the dumbest possible place and time. Luckily for Jake, his enemy had been a bad shot and ended up at room temperature, ending the debate as to whose territory it was. "Mrs. Thomas," Gary said calmly, an anodyne smile on his handsome face. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to congratulate you. If there were more brave men and women out here like you, this neighborhood would be a much better place." Mrs. Thomas was silent for a minute, looking Gary up and down with an incredulous look on her face. "Well, there are some brave men and women here trying to bring the neighborhood up, but I'm afraid we got even more hoodlums trying to bring it down," Mrs. Thomas replied. "The neighborhood is infested with them," Gary agreed, nodding his head. "That's why we need people like you. Unfortunately, my friend had to defend himself from that same scum." "Oh, so that's your story. Look, there were a couple of shots, and I don't know who shot who first, but if he was mixed up with that no-good drug dealer, it's because he was a no-good drug dealer himself, if not something worse. And if he's your friend, then you're no friend of mine or this neighborhood. Now get your butt out of my sight. I'm going to have to fumigate my porch now as it is." "Miss Thomas, I don't blame you for thinking that. But I'm afraid my friend was put into danger for the same reason you could be. He had the guts to stand up to that slimeball, and for his reward, he had to dodge a bullet." "That's not the way I saw it." "I can't blame you for that either. I mean, look at that streetlight over there, the one where the shooting happened. At night it keeps buzzing and blinking. The ones on either side are out completely. No wonder the criminals are running rampant." "You got that right," Mrs. Thomas replied. "Did you know those city council members make over $140,000 per year, but they can't afford to change these light bulbs?" "We can't wait for them to change the streetlights. That's why I'm going to pay to get you new porch lights, including a spotlight if anyone gets too close." "That would be wonderful." "You do what you have to do about testifying. I want you to follow your conscience." "Well, I'll do that. Thank you so much. I wish there were more young men in the neighborhood like you." "Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. I suppose there aren't many men like me in the neighborhood anymore. But you know what? That makes it all the more rewarding." Gary left Mrs. Thomas. The new lights arrived the next day. Jake walked out a free man less than a week later. Greg only knew he was alive because his skin felt hot. He couldn't see a thing and could only hear a faint buzz. His 6-foot-tall body was trapped on its side, bent over on itself so much that a normal person would have snapped ligaments. He wondered if he was in a torture device of some kind. "They're gonna have to do better than this to break me," he thought, as he elbowed the wall of the container holding him in place. It crumbled immediately, flooding the space with light that stung his eyes. He was able to get some leverage and punched forward at the wall in front of his knees. His fist felt ash. Lashing his arm back and forth, the walls that squeezed him disintegrated, leaving him enough space to crawl through. But as he started to move, something large and slimy crawled over his arm and beat him out of the opening. He squirmed out of his prison until he found himself face down on the forest floor. He turned around to see Joel, standing behind the tattered remains of a huge ashen shell. Behind Joel and all around him, the forest had burned to a crisp. Greg could still hear the crackling of embers and smell something like gasoline, but stronger and more caustic.
What just happened?
Greg asked.
They napalmed the forest,
Joel responded.
Huh?
Greg said.
They were looking to deep fry the old school way?
It's a good thing I had an even more old school response, Joel replied.
A giant clam. You turned into a giant clam. That was you, I felt, crawling out of your own shell.
Joel nodded. Sorry to cram you in like that, but even giant clams aren't meant to fit a full-sized man.
Thank you for saving my life,
Greg responded. Now, can you change into a giant bird to fly us out of here? Maybe, but we'd be a bigger target than the helicopter and a lot slower.
That won't be necessary,
they heard over their shoulders. They spun around to see Kim, standing about 30 feet away. How'd you get here so quickly? I thought it was going to take a week, if you were able to make it at all, Joel said.
Dr. Harrington negotiated with the dear leader directly, and he decided it wasn't worth trying to kill us anymore, especially since Dr. Harrington is letting him take all the credit for the help we've provided.
Really? Joel asked.
Yes. He also had a message for you, Joel. He gives his thanks and said some of those people you helped wouldn't have made it the 24 hours it took between when you cured them and when we got them medicine.
Are we staying to help the others? Joel asked.
Some of us are, Kim replied. We're going to maintain a safe passage between the hardest-hit villages and the refugee camps.
Only some of us,
Greg said. I'm taking Joel home.
Not until I make sure those people are okay,
Joel responded. Kim nodded. Joel made his way back to the village with Kim and found the people hugging the CVs who were bringing them large cardboard boxes of food. One girl of about 5 clung to the broad shoulders of a lantern-jawed CV, swinging as she made the previously solemn man crack a smile. He saw at least a dozen children who had been on the brink of death from malignancy the day before now eating ravenously. Most of the villagers had been cured of ailments that had not yet become noticeable, but none of them knew it was Joel who had cured them. And that was fine with Joel. His visions of death and disfigurement were gone, and that was all he could ask. That and seeing the smiles on the people's healthy faces. When the ship got back to San Diego, Joel was surprised to see Kim hand him a plane ticket to New York City.
I'm not going back to Connecticut,
he said to her. If I was, I'd be better off flying into Hartford. I'm going back to the Reform Center. If you don't want to change my ticket to Las Vegas, I'll just get a ticket when I get to New York.
You're not going back to Connecticut or Nevada,
Kim replied.
You're flying into New York because you're meeting with Dr. Harrington.
About what? Couldn't he have just told you what he wanted?
We have photographic memories, Joel. I could remember over an hour-long message from Dr. Harrington word for word. If he didn't want this meeting strictly private, he wouldn't need to have it at all.
The eyes on Joel were different this time as he approached Dr. Harrington's office. They still looked on with curiosity, even more so than before. But mixed in was deference instead of contempt. The contempt they had felt for a kid who had the gumption to stroll into the CEO's office in a golf shirt and khakis. He wore black pants and a blue button-down shirt now. But the change in their reaction had nothing to do with the way he was dressed. Joel knew Dr. Harrington kept as tight a lid as he could on information about him, but rumors snuck through. Rumors his super hearing had picked up on the ship and even here at the office. Rumors about the guy who changed into animals, who could heal the sick, how he represented the next generation of Dr. Harrington's pet designer kids, of how he was going to be mass-produced, the different versions of him to be sent out to cure disease instead of selling pills. And those were the kind rumors. There were other, more sinister rumors as well. Rumors of how Joel and the initiates were designed to keep Dr. Harrington above the law, or maybe even to let their CEO take over the country and then the entire world. Joel entered Dr. Harrington's office to find him standing with a beaming smile on his face, and his arms outstretched in a congratulatory pose.
"Joel, my good man," he said as he came over, "and so we meet again. But this time, you've seen for yourself what our partnership can accomplish. You helped save thousands, Joel. Far more than you'll ever see. Even now, hundreds of initiates are still there helping the displaced find new homes, using our technology to make arid land fertile. And all of it is being done with the cooperation of the North Korean government. Now it is, at least."
You mean after we let them take all the credit for the operation? Joel replied. Dr. Harrington nodded.
What matters is that those people were helped, not who got the glory.
They were ready to let those people starve and die. Do they really deserve the praise for the operation? Joel asked as they sat down.
Of course not, but that is not my concern.
Dr. Harrington's tone grew serious.
Joel, not only is virtue its own reward, it's the only reward a good man is concerned about. Anyone who does what is right for money, for praise, even to get into some post-mortem paradise is not a good man. He is a whore, selling himself to the highest bidder.
No sooner had Dr. Harrington said these words than he seemed to catch himself, and his countenance softened.
Forgive me, Joel. Maybe I've been in this position too long. Just about everyone I meet now is trying to hide an ulterior motive.
Dr. Harrington, I run a reform center where every candidate comes in looking for easy time, or reduced time, or both. I know all too well about ulterior motives.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear it might not be going that well.
I didn't say...
But let's not dwell on the negative. The black box was recovered from the helicopter, and it found something unusual. It found that you were flying over the village itself for only about 5 minutes. Was that enough time to heal all those hundreds of people?
Dr. Harrington relayed how Greg had told him about Joel's turning a section of a mountain to quartz, through which he sent a signal and then another signal, bypassing the mountain altogether, both curing villagers.
And I also know that you were on the internet connection practically the whole way home doing research.
Yes, that's true.
So what happened out there? And what were you reading about?
What happened out there was the next step in my development, I think. I was reading about what that next step told me about the nature of my abilities and how far I might be able to take them.
And what did you find?
I found that the nature of my abilities and the nature of the universe might be one and the same. Thanks for listening, and watch out for the next episode. Don't forget to like, follow along, and share.